Developing a single approved drug takes over a decade of high-risk research and costs an average of $2.2 billion. The moment that drug reaches the market, a clock starts ticking. The period of patent-protected market exclusivity is finite, forcing companies into a narrow window to recoup their massive initial investment. Between 2025 and 2030, the industry will hit a steep drop-off known as the patent cliff. Nearly 200 blockbuster drugs will lose their exclusivity during this 5-year window, putting $400 billion in annual revenue at risk, driving intense market anxiety. This chart models the revenue trajectory of a drug over time. Look at the path for a traditional small molecule, a chemical-based drug. At year 10, the revenue falls completely flat. Because a generic small molecule drug is a perfect identical chemical copy, substitution at the pharmacy is rapid and automatic. This triggers an immediate 80 to 90% wipeout in the originator's market share. Now, compare that to the trajectory of complex biologics, therapies derived from living cells. Here, the post-exclusivity decline avoids the sheer vertical drop. Competitors to biologics are called biosimilars. Because of manufacturing variations, they are only highly similar to the original protein, not identical. This distinction transforms the sudden cliff into a gradual slope, creating a prolonged war of attrition rather than an overnight wipeout. A loss of exclusivity does not mean a drug's profitability is finished. It is a predictable transition point in a product's lifespan. To survive this transition, companies move away from reactive defense and proactively build a multi-layered barrier around their drug. This process is called lifecycle management. This timeline charts the first 15 years of a drug post-launch. The base layer of any lifecycle defense begins right here, by generating new clinical data to reinvent the core asset. One primary method is indication expansion. Instead of launching a drug for a broad disease category, a company targets a small, highly specific patient subpopulation first. In a well-defined niche with high efficacy, the company establishes a definitive clinical track record and secures a high initial price point. From that successful beachhead, they run new clinical trials to methodically expand the drug's approval into larger, more generalized patient populations. Merck executed this strategy precisely with Keytruda. They initially secured approval for a specific subset of lung cancer patients, then relentlessly pushed into dozens of broader cancer types, turning it into one of the best-selling drugs in history. The second clinical lever involves developing next-generation formulations. This chart compares an immediate-release tablet to an extended-release version. The immediate-release curve has sharp peaks and valleys, while the extended-release formulation achieves a smooth, steady-state plateau. Flattening that peak concentration lowers toxicity, allowing less frequent dosing, and legally justifies entirely new patents. Pfizer used this exact strategy to transition its arthritis drug, Xeljanz, to a once-daily extended-release formulation, adding layers of new intellectual property. Reinventing the core molecule creates genuine medical value. That clinical data then serves as the essential bedrock for legally and commercially stretching the product's lifespan. Eventually, a drug reaches a clinical ceiling where no further reformulations make sense. Strategists must then pivot to reshaping the market environment itself. One commercial tactic is the prescription to OTC switch. By proving a drug is safe to self-administer, a company can move it onto retail shelves, leveraging established brand trust to bypass generic competition entirely. Claritin executed this successfully in 2002. Facing patent expiration, it pivoted to the consumer market and secured a massive, long-term share of the allergy sector. For drugs that must remain prescription only, the moment exclusivity expires, aggressive pricing warfare begins. This often involves the authorized generic gambit. When a patent expires, the originator launches its own generic version, produced on the same line, but sold in discounted packaging. Both products funnel revenue back to the originator. By competing with themselves, the brand captures market volume that would have gone to competitors. At the same time, the brand offers deep rebates to pharmacy benefit managers, ensuring their original branded drug remains in a preferred position on formularies. These commercial tactics cannot permanently block generic entry, but they allow a company to cannibalize its own losses, turning a sudden financial drop into a profitable descent. The final structural support relies on manipulating specific FDA regulatory pathways to legally mandate extended monopolies, completely independent of the patent office. A primary example is the Orphan Drug designation, created to incentivize research into rare diseases affecting fewer than 200,000 people. Securing an orphan approval grants a highly valuable 7 years of market exclusivity. This protection runs completely independent of the drug's base patent, shielding it from generic competition for that specific use. Companies like Alexion have systematically identified multiple rare diseases for a single drug, Soliris, stacking these orphan designations to build heavily protected, multi-billion-dollar franchises. Another powerful regulatory tool is the Pediatric exclusivity extension. If a company completes requested pediatric trials, the FDA grants an additional 6 months of market exclusivity. This extension applies to all existing adult formulations and indications, securing final-hour monopoly revenue across the entire product line. Beyond the FDA, companies utilize a much more aggressive legal tactic, the patent thicket. By filing dozens, sometimes hundreds, of secondary patents covering manufacturing processes and minor formulations, originators create an astronomically expensive legal minefield that makes it difficult for generic manufacturers to even enter the market. AbbVie deployed this strategy to defend its biologic, Humira. By accumulating an estate of over 130 U.S. patents, they successfully delayed biosimilar competitors until 2023. By methodically stacking orphan designations, pediatric extensions, and secondary patents, companies can effectively double the commercial lifespan of a single molecule. The true strength of lifecycle management isn't found in any single isolated tactic. It is in the multiplicative layering of all these strategies. Look back at the master timeline. The developmental expansions, commercial maneuvers, and stacked legal exclusivities lock together into a dense lattice, operating concurrently well past the 10th year. Surviving the post-exclusivity era presents a timing paradox. The architecture of this defense must begin years before the primary patent actually expires. Clinical trials for a next-generation formulation or a new disease indication have to be initiated while the original drug is still in its early years on the market. Constructing this architecture relies entirely on real-time data flow, combining global patent intelligence with continuous analysis of real-world patient data. Monitoring competitor research and development pipelines allows a company to identify incoming threats with enough time to deploy an effective counter-strategy. At the same time, tracking patient friction points reveals the exact clinical improvements necessary to justify a viable, patentable reformulation. A drug's lifespan is not a finite sprint towards an inevitable financial drop. Through deliberate long-term planning, a single chemical entity can be transformed into a heavily defended, multi-generational product line. In the highly regulated pharmaceutical sector, mastering the strategic second act is the ultimate separator between billions in lost revenue and sustained market domination.